Hi, this is Jose Palomino with another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Today's guest is Jim Karrh of jimkarrh.com, and it's Karrh.com. And Jim is a specialist in messaging, getting the message right, getting your organization to deliver its message right. We're not talking about taglines or mottos now, or even mission statements. We're talking about the fundamental way people communicate. So we want to get started with Jim right now. So let's welcome Jim to our show. Well, welcome, Jim, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Jose. I was honored to get the invitation because of the work that you do. And we're talking to our people. The people that
Absolutely.
I work with the most are B2B business owners and managers and sellers.
Wow. So I know you have a particular specialty, and I want you just maybe expand on it a little bit, because when you use the word like messaging or getting messages right, that can sound like anything from taglines to mottos and things like that. And I know the work you do is like, 8 levels deeper than that. So could you just expand a little bit how you define that as a practical matter for our audience?
And as a practical matter, Jose, the work that I do, it's a product in many ways of my background. So real briefly, I'm a PhD. Don't hold that against me. I'm very
Okay.
practical in my approach, but it was a lot of study of audience psychology and buyer psychology. I've also been a chief marketing officer for a mid-sized private company that did mostly B2B sales and also some business to consumer work. So knowing the practicalities of how do you get the right message into the marketplace to the people who are, in our case, delivering bottled water and coffee or selling packaging and things like that. And then for about over a decade now, Jose and everyone, I've been working primarily with executives, business to business companies and leaders and their field sales and service teams. So help them be consistently good at their real time conversations
Okay.
when they're out selling, whether they're trying to go to new prospects, they're trying to get their current customers to buy more from them at higher prices, or whatever it is, it's a growth conversation, the things that happen dozens, if not hundreds of times every day. So to your point, Jose, it's not the basis of a good conversation, frankly, isn't your mission statement. It's not some catchy slogan. I don't work in that world very much. I'm thinking about the practical stuff that you are leading yourself as a business owner every day, and also what you're trying to do across a team or even across your current customer or client base is to have people talking about your business in a productive, practical way.
So for somebody listening to this and saying, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Certainly I want to sound right when I'm talking to people about the stuff that matters or matters to them, matters to me. Um, what would you say to somebody who might say, well, yeah, but if you try to engineer all of that stuff, it makes it it's like dancing with like the steps painted on the floor. Like there's no fluidity to it. So how does that become fluid? And just how much work is involved in actually getting there?
Here's the underlying chronic expensive problem, Jose. And then I can say to your question, there are a couple of extreme responses to it, neither of which work. So here's the underlying problem that we have to solve for ourselves and for our businesses. Most sellers and most leaders and owners have far more confidence in the value of what they offer than in how to talk about it. And I see it very practically in the work that I do in the audiences that I speak with, but I've also seen it in survey results. So the one that I saw that I believe the most fully and I've seen the most recently is on a scale of 1 to 10. They ask a number of B2B executives and sellers that same question. How confident are you in the value of what you offer? And on that scale of 1 to 10, the average was more than 8. So, hey, we're not perfect, but our things work. Our services are valuable for the right customer. But ask the same question on the same scale on 1 to 10. How confident are you in the messaging behind it? Jose, the average was less than 4. So that's the gap between more than 8 and less than 4. And what happens if you lack confidence in everyday growth conversations and just how to talk about your business and whatever means? Well, that means either one, you avoid the conversation. So if we're not confident in what to say, oftentimes we won't say anything at all because we're afraid that we'll get exposed and we don't know what we're talking about, or we'll get asked a question that we don't know the answer to. It won't look good. So that means we're not prospecting. We're not checking in with our clients often enough. We're not being proactive in terms of our conversations and being helpful. The other thing that can happen is people fall into very familiar patterns and they sound like everybody else. So we wind up talking about the things that we are comfortable in, which is maybe ourselves, our story, our passion, our stuff,
Our stuff.
and all of that. And we wound up sounding salesy or canned or basically like everybody else. And you think about a good conversation, that's really not helpful. So the response can be, I've seen it on both extremes, Jose, is some leaders, some owners will go, look, may the best conversation win. It's kind of law of the jungle. I may have a couple of salespeople and I'm not going to get in the way with them. And if it works, it works. And we'll find out who's doing it well and who isn't. The problem with that is that you get a lot of inconsistency. And that, as we can talk about more, is not a basis for building trust. Inconsistency erodes trust. And so if everyone's doing their own thing, if there are the cowboys out there, then that doesn't work. The other extreme that I do see a lot of business owners and leaders go to is they try to over script it. They can get frustrated, like, why doesn't anyone else get it? Okay, I'm going to tell them exactly what to say. And then it does come across as you think, very rote, very
So
mechanical.
you either
And
have like the Wild West on the one hand, which is like, okay, it's, very Darwinian, right? My top performers will figure it out. Those
yes,
who aren't, I'll replace, maybe, right? Or as you said, even the worst thing that in the narrative that you just described here, Jim, is the fact that somebody would avoid the conversation. Like you're not going to sell anything if you don't want to talk about the opportunities to create value for your customer, right? So that's one. So the Wild West on the one hand, and on the other hand is actually I wish I had robots because then it'd be easier. I could just put in standard programming, and R2D2 would do the sales. But then it loses all the fluidity of human interaction. It just doesn't, and you won't be able to respond or zig and zag as your customers or prospects zig and zag. So it seems like
we
the
can
worst of both worlds.
we can on the other side of that conversation, Jose, we can smell a script from a mile away, right? And
I
we
mean,
don't
as human
respond to
beings,
that
we're
very well.
just trained. We've been trained to. We can tell if something's inauthentic.
We can spot a phony or someone that doesn't know what they're talking about, beyond a little surface level. And that can be all of this can be very frustrating. It's naturally frustrating and it's a growth inhibitor for your business. And so what I find happens a lot, especially with a lot of your listeners, so they have a small to medium sized business. They may be the owner operator. They're on the front lines, is this wears on you after a while. If you're the only one or one of a very small number of people who are building the relationships, who are setting the meetings, who are telling the story, that doesn't scale. And it's really hard to grow that way. And it's it drains you after a while.
Wow. Well, that's interesting too because just going back to the original gap of the more than eight. So, like, I believe in my stuff. I believe we can solve problems. Whatever it is we're in business to do, we do it well. And but I'm afraid to talk about it. That's like the death gap. I mean, at that point, there's no growth can happen there. So what are some of the let's say somebody listening to this saying, well, gee, I'm persuaded. This makes sense. I have to fix this. I think that's me. What's one or two simple steps that an owner or leader could do this week, next week, that might at least get them going in the right direction?
The first thing that I would recommend is that you think about this as a very solvable, manageable business issue. And when I spent time both doing research and just thinking through the organizations, the leaders that I've worked with, and it became, Jose, conceptually pretty simple. Like, what is it that those who choose your term, you might say, well, they all seem to be on the same page, or they're interesting, or they're actually using a message in conversations for growth. What do they do differently than others do? And what I found is that they combine three things. Again, think of a three-legged stool, conceptually pretty
Okay.
simple. So one is they start with their message itself, and those are the real words that people say, the things that they show, the questions that they ask, the stories they tell. And you think about those in ways that really are targeted toward your customers or your best fit prospects, and do it that way, knowing that in the absence of paying attention to that, then people will make it too self-centered, too much about them, too much about their stuff. So they make sure that their message is used instead of talking about I, me, my, our. It's a lot of you
Hmm.
and you and what are ways that we actually can serve people. And lots of times there's a lot of talk these days about storytelling, et cetera, and that's a useful part of the toolkit as well. So they're very strategic in thinking about how can I be interesting and relevant and conversational. The second part about this is what I call messengers. So just really thinking about the human beings that you want to share that message. And what I find, Jose, is a lot of business leaders think a little too narrowly. They think it's only for extroverts, which is not true. By the way, we have research that shows extroverts are not the best salespeople, which is different than what you and I have been led to believe for a long time. Or they think about just the sales function being their messengers, but knowing that your vendors, your channel partners, your current customers, your friends in the community all can serve a purpose in helping spread the word and taking the burden off of you. You just need to think about what do they need? How do we stay top of mind with them and give them little bite-sized pieces of things that
So
they
can I
can they
just
can
pause you
talk
on that
about?
for 1 second, though, Jim? Because I
Yes.
think there's a deep thought in that. At least I think for a lot of people listening to this, when you said messengers, my mind went to, and I imagine many people hearing this would have gone to my professional paid staff salespeople, right? But you broadened that. You said, look, it's anyone who can talk in a positive, forward-leaning way about your company, your product, and so on. I mean, you have multiple messengers, and a lot of small businesses have distribution, and you have trading partners, a supply chain, everything that need to know something more about you so they can, when they're asked about it, and it could be a casual conversation you never know about, they're on message, so to speak, about what you want them to say about you, at least close. So that's a really big idea, I think, about thinking about how do I prepare a much wider audience to be ready to take my message forward when the time is right. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, you are, Jose. And just knowing as you think about those human beings and certainly the prep and the rehearsal and the engineering, if you will, for say a sales team is going to be different, or other employees that you have is going to be very different than that for maybe someone who's a current customer or client of yours. But so on that side of things, you think, well, I'm not going to have my current customers go out and be salespeople for me. No, but you can in conversation drop in now and again, say, Jose, you're an example of the kind of business owner that I deal with a lot. So maybe it's an accountant, or maybe it's someone who has another product or service to business owners, and say, Jose, there are a lot of people who are like you that have. I'll just make up an example here. They have a family business, or they have something in transition, or those are the settings in which I really shine. I serve a lot of different kind of people, but I just want you to know that those are the kind of people that a lot like you that are my best fit clients. So if you know of others, send them my way. But just dropping in something now and again, or sharing a story about someone else that you've helped that is like them, helps it stick in their mind. And so don't we won't want to overcomplicate it. I just going back in my days when I was a chief marketing officer, we had salespeople. We also had delivery people. They're the ones who had the most customer contact. Now they weren't salespeople, and they didn't want any part of that.
Right.
So, but they were helpful. They liked being helpful. They knew by name the people where they were doing their deliveries and making recommendations. So in that case, we just got things in little bite-sized pieces where they could make recommendations and be helpful without being pushy. So you have to meet those people where they are and think about how they can be good messengers. So, but do think broadly. Most people are naturally wired for conversation. And let's just equip them and support them and encourage them in ways that they can help grow the business too.
Well, and what I love about that too, Jim, is the opposite is also true, which is if you don't intentionally prepare the people who are client facing, not just the salesperson, but like you said, support staff and whatever, they could be wildly off message, and they could be actually anti-message. I've seen that from in my own life. Just somebody coming to the house, doing something for, let's say, a cable company, and I say, hey, how's it like working for them? And they tell you all about it, not what their bosses would like them to tell me all about it. And it's like, wow, they weren't prepared for that simple, very obvious human conversation. You go into people's homes, people are going to ask you how it's like, and what do you want them to say. So I love that. Now, so you said the message itself, questions, stories aimed at the best fit kind of prospect, making sure that's right. The messenger is thinking more broadly. And so, what's the third piece on that? Because you mentioned a three-legged stool, and I don't
Right.
want our people falling on a two-legged stool.
That's right. And the third leg of the three-legged stool is management, or really management habits. So when if you want to have this as a flywheel for growth, what you really want is some single source of conversational truth. Again, not a script, but some way of organizing it. If you're the leader, then you probably want to at least help in some way, whether you do it yourself or you get some help to do it. Let's organize the right stories to tell, the right questions to ask, the right things to say about ourselves in a very human sort of way. And then you do have to make sure that it's kept fresh, that when new people come aboard in your company, that they're getting that as well. Or oftentimes you have frontline people who become managers for the first time, and they're supposed to coach and encourage people, but no one ever did that with them. So they need some source for it as well. And then just to keep things consistent. So you want to be consistent with what's on your website or what's in your other collateral materials or social media, et cetera. So um, all of that together. Here's the great news, Jose. Most businesses and business leaders aren't very good at this. They're in that world of the more than eight versus the less than
Right.
four. And you don't have to be perfect, but if you take this as a priority, and I'd say you should, whether you're trying to get net new business or sell more to your existing customers or both. But if you take control of that and get consistently good at it, then you will really stand out in terms of your growth opportunities.
And would you agree with this, Jim? And I love the promise of you can get consistently good at this. Uh, it seems to me, hearing you, that somebody listening to this doesn't have to go from a four on that confidence level to an eight plus overnight. Like there's a journey here, right? I mean, just
Yes.
try something out and do that. So if somebody said, "Okay, I'm going to do something by next week. I want to talk to my folks." Is it developing a mission statement? Is it just inventorying what's on the website? Is it, I mean, obviously you could hire professionals, folks like you and so on, but if they just wanted to do something to lean into getting better at this, what could be one or two things they could do pretty quickly just by virtue of just buying into the concept?
I'll offer one thing to do and one thing not to do.
Perfect.
And the not to do, because you just mentioned it, is say revisiting your mission or vision statement. And I'm not undercutting the value of that. However, as a basis for conversation, Jose, it's lousy. And here's why. There's actually been research. I didn't have the patience to do it, but I read someone else's.
Okay.
And they studied several hundred corporate mission statements. And guess what? There's the same dozen words in all of them.
All of them.
So they all say customer engagement, community, sustainability,
Innovation.
service, yeah, all of it, stakeholder, whatever. It's just a word salad. So
Right.
what happens, and it doesn't mean it's not true that you don't feel it, but if your mission statement, frankly, sounds like everybody else's, then you have turned yourself into a commodity. You've shot yourself in the foot.
Right.
So don't worry about that. Here's what I would suggest is start with, think about one conversation that would be really key to your growth plans. So maybe if you're looking at the balance of this year or on into next year, you think what's key for us is we need, say, maybe it's net new business, or we have a new product or offering that is really key to our growth plans. And so we have to talk about a different thing that we do, whatever that might be. And then think about who are your messengers, whether it be your salespeople or others who can help carry that message. And just think about how can we engineer that? How can we get good at one conversation that's really important to us? So, for example, we have a lot of people who in the B2B space, they have regular quarterly business reviews or ongoing reviews with their most important customers or clients.
They should.
They should. So oftentimes they either don't have them or they become kind of a tactical laundry list. And I hear it very often. And it may be a formal process or it may be a touch base that we do on a regular cadence, but mastering that so it becomes not just did we do all the things along the way? Is everybody happy? Um, but also what's around the corner? Get that customer or client to talk a little bit about what's next. What are the things that we can help think through to help you with? What are your priorities and additional ways perhaps that we can serve you and take some of the load off of you. So whatever that conversation might be, let's concentrate on that one. So think through, what's the message? What do we want to say and share and ask? If it's prototypically good, who's going to be our messenger or set of messengers? And it shouldn't be just the owner. It shouldn't
Right.
be just the CEO. And then how can we continue to get better at it? Right. So how can we make sure we got the right tools and things like that, and maybe share good examples? Hey, to tell the rest of the team, we had a great QBR with so and so. Here's what we did that worked. Let's see if we can start applying it in other areas. So concentrate on one conversation at a time, but get something that's really important for your growth plans.
Wow, Jim. Well, first of all, time has flown, and this is one of my favorite topics, so I love it. And thank you so much for being part of the Revenue Throughput podcast today. If somebody listening and says, "Well, this guy Jim really sounds like he's right where I need to learn more about," how would somebody learn more about you, get in contact with you? Uh, what do you have coming up? I think you're going to be at Outbound 2021 as well.
I, yes, I am. I'm actually going to talk about building a messaging playbook
Oh,
during one of the sessions at Outbound. In general, Jose, the toughest thing that you may have to do is get close to the spelling of my last name. It's
okay.
pronounced Karrh. It's spelled Karrh. So you can, and there are several ways that I'd love to help. One is, here's the free stuff. I have my website, jimkarrh.com. Again, Karrh. If you get close, I purchased a lot of the domains for the misspellings of my name, so you'll
Sure.
get there, and a lot of free resources for you there as well. I would welcome a connection on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I'm pretty active as my social media platform of choice. I mentioned that you heard me here today with Jose, and I'll know that you're not one of those people selling SEO services from the other side of the world. I have a podcast myself called the Manage Your Message podcast. And then I also have a book that's out in both it's print and it's Kindle, and it's an audiobook format as well. It's called The Science of Customer Connections: Manage Your Message to Grow Your Business. You can find that in all the usual places, Jose, and it's a nice practical guide of walking you through those pieces of how you can do this and put it together for yourself.
Fantastic. And we'll include that in the show notes, but I know a lot of people listening are just listening. So it's Jim Karrh, Karrh.com.
That's exactly right. And it's been recommended that I buy a vowel, but that's not in the offer.
There you go. Jim, thanks again. Really appreciate it. Fantastic.
Thank you, Jose.